The snow did not fall. It descended, a solid curtain of white erasing the world. From inside the lukewarm cocoon of the Starlight Diner, the city was a ghost of itself, its familiar angles and arteries blurred into a soft, formless oblivion. The wind howled a low, mournful complaint against the plate glass windows, which rattled in their frames, threatening to surrender to the cold. Outside, the neon sign, a hopeful shooting star with 2 dead bulbs, sputtered, casting a weak, intermittent pulse of pink and blue onto the accumulating drifts that swallowed the curb. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, frying oil, and the lemon-scented disinfectant Maya had just used to mop the checkered floor. It was almost midnight, an hour past closing, but the storm had pinned her here. Her manager, Stan, had left 3 hours ago in his roaring pickup, leaving her with a set of keys and a warning to lock up tight, as if the blizzard itself were a thief. Maya traced a circle on the fogged window with her fingertip, the glass frigid against her skin. Her reflection was a pale, tired oval, her dark ponytail a slash of ink against the white shirt of her uniform. The long red apron, tied securely around her waist, was the only slash of defiant color in the muted room. The diner, usually a place of chaotic comfort, felt cavernous and lonely in the silence, populated only by the hum of the drink cooler and the frantic ticking of the clock above the pass-through. She was 25, and some nights, in the bone-deep quiet after the last customer had gone, she felt as if she had been born in this diner and would one day simply evaporate into its greasy, comforting atmosphere. The world outside was a place she read about, a landscape of distant ambitions and complex lives she served coffee to. Here, life was simple. Fill the salt shakers, wipe the counters, count the till. Tonight, the simplicity was a comfort, a small, warm fortress against the elemental rage of the storm. A shape materialized in the swirling chaos outside the main door. At first, it was just a darker patch in the white maelstrom, a smudge of gray against the snow. It resolved slowly, staggering toward the faint glow of the diner's sign. Maya straightened up, her heart giving a nervous little thump against her ribs. It was a person, hunched and struggling, moving with a painful slowness. They reached the door, fumbling at the handle, their form barely discernible through the ice beginning to crust on the glass. Stan's voice echoed in her head. "Don't open for anyone." But this was not just anyone. This was a person about to be swallowed by the storm. Maya's practicality warred with a deeper, more insistent instinct. She moved from the window, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking on the clean linoleum. As she reached the door, she saw a face pressed near the glass, pale, ancient, and etched with desperation. It was an old woman. Without a second thought, Maya turned the deadbolt. The lock made a loud, definitive clack in the stillness. She pulled the heavy door inward, and the wind screamed into the diner, bringing with it a blast of ice and snow that skittered across the floor. The old woman practically fell inside, a fragile heap of dark wool and shivering limbs. She was tiny, her face a beautiful, wrinkled map, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. She whispered something in Italian, a torrent of words Maya couldn't understand, her hands trembling violently. "It's okay," Maya said, her voice soft as she pushed the door shut against the storm's fury, the silence rushing back in, profound and sudden. "You're safe here," the woman, whose coat was already melting into a puddle on the floor, looked up at her, her gaze clinging to Maya's as if she were a lighthouse. She was shivering uncontrollably, her lips a faint shade of blue. Maya's gaze fell to the woman's thin, inadequate shoes. Compassion, fierce and immediate, flooded her. She took the woman gently by the arm. "Come on. Let's get you warm." She led the small, frail figure to a booth, the red vinyl worn smooth with decades of use. From her own locker in the back, Maya retrieved a thick, worn blanket she kept for naps on split shifts and wrapped it carefully around the woman's shoulders. The woman clutched it, her knuckles white. "Thank you," she breathed, the English words heavily accented and fragile. Maya gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You just rest in the kitchen," She ignored the neat, pre-portioned containers for tomorrow's lunch rush. Instead, she found the large stockpot from the afternoon's soup special, a hearty chicken vegetable. There was a good amount left. She ladled a generous portion into a clean white bowl, the steam rising in a fragrant cloud. She added a handful of crackers to a side plate and carried the tray back out to the booth. She set the bowl down on the formica tabletop. The rich smell of broth and herbs filled the space between them. The old woman looked from the soup to Maya, her dark eyes luminous with unshed tears. She picked up the spoon with a hand that still trembled, but she managed to lift it to her lips. She took a sip, then another, the warmth seeming to spread through her visibly, unclenching something deep inside her. Maya sat opposite her, watching the simple, profound act of a person finding sanctuary. In the quiet of the snow-locked diner, with the wind howling its impotent rage outside, this small act of kindness felt like the only thing in the world that mattered. The next morning, the world was born anew, sculpted from silent, pristine white. The snow had stopped, leaving behind a city hushed and buried under a thick, sparkling blanket. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the sun cast long, sharp shadows that made the landscape look stark and beautiful. Maya crunched through the untouched snow in the diner's parking lot, the air so cold it felt sharp in her lungs. She had let the old woman, Elena, sleep in the warmest booth until the plows began their work just before dawn. A taxi, summoned after a dozen calls, had finally navigated the cleared main roads to pick her up. Elena had pressed a small, silver locket into Maya's hand before she left, her eyes full of a gratitude so immense it needed no words. Maya had gently refused, but the old woman had insisted, closing Maya's fingers around the cool metal. Now, Maya felt the locket's slight weight in her pocket as she unlocked the diner. The day felt strange, scrubbed clean and unnervingly quiet. Stan was late, his pickup likely struggling with the secondary roads. She started the coffee, the familiar, robust scent of comfort against the morning's surreal stillness. It was just after 10 when they arrived. Two black SUVs, so clean they seemed to absorb the light, slid silently to a stop in the freshly plowed lot. They were utterly alien against the backdrop of the humble diner and the snow-piled landscape. Their tinted windows revealed nothing. Maya paused, a coffee pot in her hand, and watched as doors opened in unison. Men in dark, impeccably tailored suits emerged. They moved with a predatory grace, their eyes scanning the area, missing nothing. They were not police. They were not businessmen. They were something else, something that made the hairs on the back of Maya's neck stand on end. One of them opened a rear door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a figure stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a long, black cashmere coat that fell to his ankles. Even from a distance, he commanded the space around him, his stillness more intimidating than any movement. The men parted for him as he walked toward the diner's entrance, his polished leather shoes making no sound on the cleared path. The bell above the door chimed, a ridiculously cheerful sound in the suddenly tense atmosphere. He stepped inside, bringing the crisp, cold air with him. Behind him, flanked by two of the suited men, was Elena. She looked transformed. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, and she wore an elegant cashmere wrap. The fear and desperation of the previous night were gone, replaced by a quiet composure. Her eyes found Maya's, and a small, knowing smile touched her lips. The man, however, did not smile. His gaze swept the diner once, a quick, dismissive inventory, before it landed on Maya. It was a heavy, assessing look. His face was all sharp angles and severe beauty, his eyes a dark, unreadable shade of brown. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his mid-30s, but he carried an ancient authority. He was the center of gravity in the room. Everything and everyone else was merely in his orbit. He stopped a few feet from the counter where she stood, frozen. The silence stretched, thick and charged. His men remained by the door, silent sentinels. Elena watched, her expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low, smooth baritone with a rich Italian accent. It was not a loud voice, but it filled the entire diner. "You are the one," he said. It was not a question. It was a verdict. His eyes held hers, and Maya felt pinned by the sheer weight of his presence. She forced herself to stand straighter, her hand tightening on the handle of the coffee pot until her knuckles were white. The warmth of the glass was a small, grounding anchor in a sea of sudden, cold fear. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her own voice sounding thin and reedy in comparison to his. A flicker of something, not quite amusement, but a dry acknowledgement, passed through his dark eyes. He took a step closer, and the scent of expensive cologne, cold air, and something else, something metallic and dangerous, reached her. "My mother," he said, his gaze flicking briefly to Elena, who stood watching them with an unnerving calm. "You gave her shelter. You gave her warmth when the world gave her nothing." He paused, his focus returning to Maya with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. "This is a debt." Maya finally put the coffee pot down on the warmer, the clink of glass on metal unnaturally loud. It wasn't a debt. It was soup. She was cold. She lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. "Anyone would have done it." "No," he corrected, the words sharp and final. "They would not. Most people see vulnerability and turn away. They see risk and lock their doors. You did not." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and produced a thick envelope. He placed it on the counter, pushing it toward her. It landed with a soft, heavy thud. "This is for your trouble. For the food. For your risk." Maya looked at the envelope, then back at his face. It was more money than she probably made in a year. It was also an insult. It was an attempt to close a ledger, to turn an act of human decency into a transaction. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She pushed the envelope back toward him. His eyes narrowed slightly. It was the first sign of any emotion other than unnerving control. No one, it seemed, said no to this man. "Everyone wants money," he stated, as if it were a law of physics. "I don't," she repeated. "I'm glad your mother is safe." That's all. For a long moment, he simply studied her, his head tilted. He seemed to be reevaluating her, like a puzzle he had thought was simple but now revealed an unexpected complexity. He glanced at the rejected envelope, then back at her. A slow, dangerous smile finally touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You are correct," he said softly, his tone shifting. It was no longer a business dealing. It was something far more personal. A debt like this cannot be paid with paper. He looked around the small diner, at the worn red booths and the chipped counter, his expression one of profound distaste. "This place is not for you." He looked back at her. "My mother believes you are a good woman. A rare thing. She believes you have a warm heart in a cold world." He took another step, closing the remaining distance between them until he was leaning slightly over the counter. "Such things are valuable. They must be protected." His voice dropped even lower, a velvet threat. "You protected what is most valuable to me. Now, you have become my responsibility. I will protect you." Maya's breath caught in her throat. "I don't need your protection. You do not yet know that you do," he said simply. He straightened up, his decision made. "Your life here is over. You will come with me." He turned to one of his men. "Fabio. Take care of her employer. Ensure he understands she will not be returning." He looked at Maya one last time. "My name is Alessandro Gallo, and from this day, you belong to me." The world tilted on its axis. The words, "You belong to me," echoed in the silent diner, not as a romantic proclamation, but as a statement of acquisition. It was the calm, unassailable pronouncement of a man who did not make requests, only decisions. Maya felt a wave of dizziness, her hand gripping the edge of the counter to steady herself. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She looked past Alessandro to Elena, searching for some sign of protest, of clarification, but the old woman's expression was serene, almost approving. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than the man's terrifying audacity. "You can't be serious," Maya breathed, the words barely a whisper. "This is insane." Alessandro simply watched her, his face a mask of implacable resolve. He did not feel the need to argue or persuade. He had stated a fact, and now he was merely waiting for reality to catch up to her. Fabio, he said again, his voice hardening slightly. The man named Fabio, broad and impassive, gave a slight nod, and his phone was already at his ear as he stepped outside. The finality of it was suffocating. "You can't just take a person," Maya said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength from sheer disbelief. "I am not an object you can claim. An object would not have saved my mother," he replied, the logic cold and absolute. "An object would have taken the money." He gestured for her to come out from behind the counter. It was a small, almost casual flick of his fingers, but it carried the force of an imperial command. She didn't move. She was rooted to the spot by a combination of terror and a stubborn, fiery defiance. This was her space, her worn linoleum floor, her chipped counter. He was the intruder. "No," she said. The word was small, but it hung in the air between them, sharp and clear. Alessandro's expression did not change, but a dangerous stillness settled over him. He walked to the gap at the end of the counter and stepped behind it, entering her workspace. The move was a violation, a deliberate crossing of a boundary. He was now on her side, the space suddenly claustrophobic. She had to crane her neck to look up at him. He was close enough now that she could see the fine weave of his coat, the faint scar that bisected his left eyebrow. "Your apron," he said, his voice soft. He reached out, not to touch her, but to untie the knot of her red apron at the small of her back. His fingers were deft and impersonal. The strings loosened, and the apron, her uniform, her armor, sagged. He took the fabric in his hand and slowly pulled it away from her, folding it once with neat, precise movements before setting it on the counter. The gesture was deeply symbolic. He was stripping her of her old life. "You will not need this anymore," he stated. He then looked at her, his gaze dropping to her hands, chapped and red from hot water and cleaning chemicals. He reached out again, this time taking her hand in his. His grasp was not rough, but it was inescapable. His skin was warm, his palm calloused in a way that suggested something other than a life of leisure. He turned her hand over, studying it for a second. "Come," he said, the single word an unbreakable command. He began to lead her out from behind the counter, his grip firm. Panic, cold and sharp, finally broke through her shock. She tried to pull her hand back, a futile, desperate struggle. "Let go of me." He didn't even seem to notice her resistance. It was like a child pulling against a stone wall. He led her toward the door, whereas other men stood waiting. As they passed the booth where Elena had slept, his mother stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Maya's arm. "It is for the best, Kara," she said softly. "He will keep you safe." The word was a mockery. She was being kidnapped, her life dismantled before her eyes, and they called it safety. As Alessandro pulled her out of the diner and into the brilliant, blinding light of the snow-covered morning, Maya looked back one last time at the Starlight Diner. It looked small and sad, a life she was being torn from, a world that no longer belonged to her. The black SUV door opened, a dark mouth waiting to swallow her whole. The transition was a study in jarring contrasts. The interior of the SUV was a silent, hermetically sealed world of black leather and polished wood. It smelled of nothing but wealth. Outside, the familiar, slightly shabby streets of her neighborhood slid by, muffled and distant behind the tinted glass, looking like scenes from a film about someone else's life. Maya sat rigidly, her hand still loosely held in Alessandro's. He had not let go, but his grip was no longer forceful. It was simply there, a constant, warm weight on her skin, claiming possession. She stared straight ahead, her mind a maelstrom of fear and furious rebellion. She refused to look at him, refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her terror. They drove out of her part of the city, the low-slung buildings and corner stores giving way to wider boulevards, then to the gleaming, steel and glass towers of the financial district. The SUV pulled into a private underground garage, the gates sliding shut behind them with a heavy, definitive boom. The sound echoed in the concrete space, a final punctuation mark on the end of her freedom. They rode an elevator in silence. It was not a normal elevator, it was a private one, operated by a key Alessandro produced from his pocket. The ride was unnervingly fast and smooth, ascending without a sound. Maya's ears popped. When the doors opened, they did not open into a hallway, but directly into a living space so vast and empty it felt more like a museum gallery than a home. The entire far wall was a sheet of glass, offering a breathtaking, godlike view of the city spread out below, the snow-covered rooftops glittering under the midday sun. The floors were white marble, the furniture sparse and brutally modern, a black leather sofa, a glass table, a single piece of abstract art on a towering wall. It was magnificent, impressive, and as cold and soulless as a tomb. Elena had been taken to another part of the penthouse by one of the suited men, leaving Maya alone with him. Alessandro finally released her hand. The sudden absence of his touch left her skin feeling cold. He walked over to the wall of windows, his back to her. "This will be your home now," he said, his voice resonating in the cavernous space. Maya wrapped her arms around herself, a small, defensive gesture against the overwhelming scale of the room. "This is a prison," she retorted, her voice shaking slightly. He turned around, his expression unreadable. "A prison is a place you cannot leave." "You can leave," he gestured vaguely toward the elevator. "The door will open for you. The city is down there. You can walk back to your diner, to your small apartment, to your small life." The offer hung in the air, a test. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it was not a genuine offer of freedom. It was a choice between a gilded cage and something far worse. "And what happens if I do?" she asked, her voice quiet. "If I walk away?" He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw the predator behind the calm facade. "Then I cannot protect you," he said, his tone deceptively mild. "The men who are my enemies will learn that a simple waitress is important to me. They will not care that you have walked away. They will see you as a vulnerability, a tool to be used against me. They will find you, and what they do to you will be far worse than anything you imagine this to be." The unspoken threat was terrifyingly clear. By saving his mother, she had painted a target on her own back. Her act of kindness had made her a pawn in a game she didn't know the rules of. Staying here was imprisonment. Leaving was a death sentence. He had engineered it perfectly. He had left her with no choice at all. "So, I'm a prisoner," she stated, the reality of it landing with a dull, heavy thud in her chest. "You are a treasure," he corrected softly. "And treasures must be kept in a fortress." He walked toward a hallway she hadn't noticed. "Your room is this way. Rest. We will talk more later." Maya didn't move. She stood alone in the center of the vast, empty room, a tiny figure dwarfed by the opulence and the cold, hard truth of her new reality. She was his. Days bled into a week, a disorienting passage of time marked only by the shifting light across the marble floors. Maya existed in a state of suspended animation, a ghost haunting the edges of Alessandro's life. She had a bedroom larger than her entire apartment, with a bed that felt like sinking into a cloud and a closet filled with clothes she was afraid to touch, cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, dresses made of fabrics she didn't know the names for. They had appeared one afternoon, a silent offering from a man who provided for his possessions. She wore her own jeans and one of the plain t-shirts she'd managed to pack in the 10 frantic minutes she was given to collect her things, a small, stubborn act of retaining her identity. She saw Alessandro only in the evenings. He would return as silently as he left, his presence filling the vast penthouse, his energy dark and weary. They rarely spoke. He would sit with a glass of amber liquid, staring out at the city lights, lost in thoughts she couldn't begin to guess at. Her fear had not subsided, but it had changed, crystallizing into a tense, wary observation. She watched him, studying him the way one might study a dangerous, beautiful animal. The true bridge in this strange, cold world was Elena. The old woman, now vibrant and healthy, sought Maya out. She seemed to exist in a separate sphere of warmth within the sterile opulence of the penthouse. One afternoon, Maya found her in the enormous, stainless steel kitchen, staring forlornly at a state-of-the-art stove that looked more like a spaceship's control panel. "I cannot make this devil machine work," Elena sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I wish only for a simple soup," an idea sparked in Maya. It was a tether to normalcy, to a version of herself she recognized. "I can make you soup," she offered. Elena's face lit up. In the cavernous, immaculate pantry, Maya found everything she needed. The quality of the ingredients was staggering: fresh vegetables, organic chicken, herbs still in tiny pots. It was a world away from the bulk cans and frozen produce of the diner. But the process was the same. The rhythmic chop of the knife on the cutting board was a familiar comfort. The smell of onions and carrots sautéing in olive oil began to fill the cold, modern kitchen with a homey, inviting fragrance. She worked with a quiet focus, losing herself in the simple, practical task. She felt a presence and turned to see Alessandro standing in the doorway, watching her. He was leaning against the frame, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. He looked tired, the hard edges of his authority softened slightly by exhaustion. He didn't speak, just observed as she moved around the kitchen, her earlier stiffness replaced by a fluid competence. She was in her element, creating warmth in his cold world. She poured the finished soup into a simple ceramic bowl, one she'd found tucked away in a cabinet, a stark contrast to the severe, modern dinnerware. She carried it to the small table in the kitchen where Elena was waiting. As she set it down, she looked up and found Alessandro still watching her, his expression unreadable but intense. "She has not had a proper meal in weeks," he said, his voice quiet. It was the closest he'd ever come to a personal admission. "Since my father, since before. She trusts no one's cooking." He looked at the bowl of soup, then at Maya. "But she trusts you." Later that evening, after Elena had retired, Maya was cleaning the kitchen, wiping down the counters. It was a habit she couldn't break. Alessandro entered the room and came to stand beside her. He held out a bowl, the same simple ceramic one she had used for his mother. It was empty and clean. He had washed it himself. He placed it on the counter without a word. It was a small, mundane action, but in the silent, charged space of their strange relationship, it felt monumental. It was an acknowledgement, a shared moment over something as simple as a bowl of soup. For the first time, she saw a flicker of the man beneath the monster, a hint of the son who loved his mother, a man who understood, on some level, the value of a gesture that had nothing to do with money or power. The public test came 2 weeks into her gilded captivity. Alessandro informed her, not asked her, that she would be accompanying him to a charity gala at the city's art museum. The event was in honor of a new hospital wing, a cause his family apparently supported, with a theatrical display of philanthropy. A dress was delivered to her room. It was a gown of deep crimson silk that felt like liquid fire against her skin. It was sleeveless and elegant, its color a stark, deliberate echo of the red apron she had once worn. When she looked at herself in the mirror, a stranger looked back, a polished, beautiful woman who bore little resemblance to the tired waitress from the Starlight Diner. But her eyes were the same, wide and watchful. Alessandro was waiting for her in the main living area. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, the severe black and white making him look even more formidable. When he saw her, he stopped, his glass of whiskey pausing halfway to his lips. For a fleeting, unguarded moment, his mask of control slipped, and she saw a raw, undisguised appreciation in his eyes. He said nothing, but the look was more potent than any compliment. He simply held out his arm, and after a fractional hesitation, she placed her hand on his forearm. His muscle tensed beneath her touch. The museum was a dazzling chaos of glittering jewels, champagne flutes, and forced laughter. Maya felt like an exhibit herself, her hand resting on the arm of one of the city's most powerful and feared men. People's eyes slid over her, full of curiosity and speculation. Alessandro navigated the crowd with an easy, predatory grace, his presence parting the sea of elites. He introduced her to no one, simply keeping her tucked close to his side, a hand resting proprietarily on the small of her back. His touch was a brand, a clear signal to the entire room. The threat, when it came, was subtle. A man with silver hair and cold, reptilian eyes approached them. His name was Marco Bellini, a rival Alessandro had mentioned once in a clipped, dismissive tone. Bellini's smile was oily and insincere. "Alessandro," he greeted, his eyes immediately flicking to Maya. "You have been hiding a treasure, Bellini." Alessandro's voice was flat, devoid of warmth. "A beautiful companion," Bellini continued, his gaze lingering on Maya in a way that made her skin crawl. "One must be careful with such treasures. They are so fragile, so easily broken." The threat was unmistakable, a poisoned dart aimed directly at her. The air grew thick and cold. Maya felt Alessandro's body go rigid beside her. The hand on her back tightened, not painfully, but with a sudden, absolute possessiveness. His knuckles were white. "My treasures," Alessandro said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal murmur that was meant only for Bellini, "are not fragile. And those who touch what is mine tend to break themselves." He stared at Bellini, a look of such pure, cold menace in his eyes that the other man's slick smile faltered. Bellini gave a tight nod and retreated back into the crowd. The encounter lasted less than a minute, but it left Maya trembling. Alessandro immediately steered her away, his movements swift and decisive. "We are leaving," he said, his jaw tight. He guided her through a side exit, into the cold night air where one of his black SUVs was already waiting. As they sped away from the museum, Maya saw two of Alessandro's men flanking Bellini as he exited the building. There was a brief, sharp exchange, and then Bellini was bundled unceremoniously into a dark, unmarked van. It was brutally efficient and terrifyingly swift. She had just witnessed the consequence of threatening him. In the silent car, she finally understood. She was not just a symbol of his vulnerability. She was now the trigger for his violence. Her presence in his life was not a protection for her, but a danger to others, and a mortal danger to herself. The incident at the gala shifted everything. The silent, tense truce in the penthouse was shattered, replaced by an atmosphere thick with unspoken fear. Maya could feel the danger now, not as an abstract concept, but as a living entity that had her in its sights. Alessandro became more remote, more guarded than ever. He spent long hours on the phone, his conversations in rapid, low Italian, his voice like the flick of a whip. He posted guards in the hallway outside the penthouse, a constant, visible reminder of the cage she was in. He was building the walls of her fortress higher, but it only made her feel more trapped. One evening, a week after the gala, he came to her room. She was sitting by the window, watching the endless stream of headlights on the streets far below, a river of lives she was no longer a part of. He didn't knock, simply entered and stood by the door. "This was a mistake," he said. The words were stark, stripped of all emotion. Maya turned to look at him. He looked exhausted, the weight of his world pressing down on him. "Bringing you here, involving you," she said, nothing waiting. This was not an apology. It was a strategic assessment. "Bellini is an animal," he continued, his voice flat. "He sees a weakness, and he will tear at it until he draws blood. You are that weakness." He walked further into the room, stopping several feet away from her. He looked at her not as a woman, but as a tactical problem he needed to solve. "I have made arrangements," he said, his tone becoming clinical, as if he were outlining a business deal. "A new life. Far from here. A new name, a new history. There is a house waiting for you in a small town on the coast. It is quiet. No one will find you. You will have more than enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life." He was offering her an escape. He was offering her freedom, but it felt like an exile. He was trying to erase her, to undo the complication she represented. Maya stood up, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. This was his sacrifice. He was letting her go, not because he didn't want her, but because her presence endangered them both and, more importantly, his control. For a man like Alessandro, who managed every variable and eliminated every threat, she was the one variable he couldn't control. Releasing her was his way of winning, of re-establishing order. It was the only way he knew how to love something, by locking it away or setting it free, both at a distance. "You can leave tonight," he said. "A car is waiting. By morning, Maya, the waitress from the Starlight Diner, will cease to exist. You will be safe." He finally met her eyes, and in their depths, she saw a flicker of something that looked devastatingly like loss. He was severing the one connection he had to a world of warmth and simple goodness. He was choosing to remain in the cold. He was pushing her away to protect her, but in doing so, he was also protecting himself from the vulnerability she inspired in him. He was cutting out the part of him that she had touched, the part that was human. It was the ultimate act of a man who believed the only way to save someone was to remove them from his own destructive orbit. "This is the only way," he said, his voice a near whisper. He was trying to convince himself, as much as her. A profound silence filled the room, broken only by the distant, muted hum of the city. Maya looked at him, at this powerful, ruthless man who was offering her an escape, a clean slate, a life free from fear. He was offering her precisely what she should have wanted from the moment he walked into her diner. Safety, anonymity, freedom. But the offer felt hollow, an amputation of a part of her soul she hadn't known existed until him. She thought of the small town on the coast, the quiet house, the endless, lonely days. It would be a life, but it would be a life in hiding, a life lived as a ghost. It would be safe, but it would not be living. He had brought her into his dark, dangerous world, but in it, she had found a strange, terrifying clarity. She had seen the man who loved his mother enough to build a fortress around her. She had seen the protector who would burn the world down for what he held dear. And she had seen the profound loneliness in his eyes. He thought he was solving a problem. He didn't realize he was her problem now, the one she couldn't or wouldn't walk away from.
"No," she said.
The word was soft, but it landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. Alessandro's head snapped up, his eyes widening in disbelief. He had planned for every contingency except this one. He had not planned for her refusal. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled shock. "I said no," Maya repeated, and this time, her voice was stronger, filled with a certainty that surprised even herself. She took a step toward him, closing the distance he always so carefully maintained. "I am not a problem for you to solve, Alessandro. I am not a package to be shipped off for my own good. You don't get to make this decision for me." He stared at her, utterly confounded. "This is not a negotiation. This is for your survival. My survival is my own business," she countered, her gaze unwavering. "You brought me into this world. You told me I was your responsibility. Well, you don't get to abdicate that responsibility just because it gets difficult. You don't get to send me away." Her fear was gone, burned away by a fierce, unexpected anger and something else, something terrifyingly close to love. This was her choice. Her active, conscious choice to step into the storm with him, rather than watch it from a distant, safe shore. "What Bellini said, he was wrong," she continued, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. "I am not fragile. And I am not your weakness. Not unless you let me be." This was her reclaiming her agency, not by running away, but by choosing to stay. It was the refusal that was also a vow. She was no longer a victim of his world. She was choosing to be a part of it, on her own terms. "I'm not leaving," she said, the words a final, irrevocable declaration. "So you're going to have to figure out how to protect me right here." She stood before him, her chin high, her heart pounding not with fear, but with the terrifying, exhilarating thrill of her own decision. She had rejected his sacrifice, and in doing so, had made her own. For a long, breathless moment, Alessandro was completely still. He looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time, not as a complication or a treasure, but as a woman of impossible, infuriating courage. Her refusal was an act of defiance, so profound it shattered his entire worldview. He operated on the principle of control, of moving pieces on a board to achieve a desired outcome. She had just flipped the board over. He had offered her the gilded cage or the clean escape, the only two options he understood. She had rejected both and chosen him, with all the danger that entailed. It was a choice he had never been offered before, a choice made not out of fear or obligation, but out of a strength that mirrored his own. He took a step toward her, then another, until he was standing directly in front of her. The air between them crackled with a tension that was no longer about fear or power, but about a raw, terrifying vulnerability. He slowly raised a hand, not to command or restrain, but with a hesitation that was utterly foreign to him. He gently, almost reverently, touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was warm, a stark contrast to the coldness he projected to the world. It was an admission of defeat, a surrender. "You are going to be the death of me," he whispered, the words a raw confession. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of the catastrophic power she held over him. Maya did not flinch. She held his gaze, her own eyes clear and steady. "Or maybe," she said softly, "I'm the one thing that will keep you alive." He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since she said no, a ragged, weary sound. He closed his eyes for a second, and in that brief moment, the ruthless Mafia boss vanished, leaving only a man undone by a quiet, stubborn goodness he could neither command nor comprehend. He leaned in and rested his forehead against hers, a gesture of such profound intimacy it stole her breath. The scent of him, the faint warmth of his skin, the sheer, solid presence of him, filled her senses. The vast, cold penthouse, the city lights, the looming threat of their enemies, it all faded away, leaving only the two of them in this small, sacred space. "Stay, then," he murmured against her skin, the words both a plea and a promise. "Stay and be my ruin." The surrender was complete. Not hers, but his. He had tried to protect her by pushing her away, but she had shown him that true protection lay in standing together. Outside, the first flakes of a new snow began to fall, soft and silent against the glass wall of the penthouse. They were not the furious, world-ending flakes of the storm that had brought them together, but a gentle dusting, a quiet promise of a new beginning. In the heart of a dark and dangerous world, against all odds, a stubborn warmth had taken root. Alessandro pulled back slightly, his dark eyes searching hers, no longer hiding the depth of emotion behind them. He lowered his head and his lips met hers, not with the force of a man who takes what he wants, but with the tentative reverence of a man who has just been given a gift he knows he will never deserve. It was a kiss that sealed not a transaction, but a treaty, an alliance of two worlds colliding to create a new one, fragile and fierce, in the shelter of the storm.